Ed here with the Digital Digest, and today I wanted to share a comparison between the HP Spectre x360 13t on the left and the 14t on the right. Now these are two very similar machines. They have the same processor, which is Intel's 11th gen Tiger Lake 1165 G7 CPU, 16 gigs of RAM, Wi-Fi 6, Bluetooth 5.0. We've got a 0.5 terabyte NVMe in the 13T and a 1 terabyte NVMe in the 14T. But the most important difference between these two machines, since they share so much in common, besides the fact that HP makes both of them and they're both 2-in-1s with the exact same pen input, is the display and the touchpads. So when we're talking about displays, we've got a 4K 13.3-inch 16:9 AMOLED on the left, and then we have a 3000 by 2000 resolution 13.5-inch 3:2 aspect ratio display on the right. And while they are very similar, they are also different even when it comes to color accuracy. So let's start off by taking a look at these displays and a listen to their speaker quality. See if I can get these in sync a little bit better. We've got a lead here. Maybe now they're caught up with one another. Looks like it. Pretty close. Move that out of the way. So let's stop it right there. So I know we're only 30 some odd seconds into this, and this isn't generally the demo clip that I use. Excuse me, the glare on the right side of the display there, the reflection rather that it's picking up. Both of these have anti-reflective displays, or the glass I should say. No matte finish if that's what you're looking for, but they handle glare quite well. Nothing new to the 13T, but again, the 14T is a brand new machine that HP has never made before. So I mentioned the displays being different. They are. And whether or not you're going to find more pleasure in using the 3:2 aspect ratio versus the 16:9 aspect ratio is really a matter of personal preference and nothing more. Now, for me personally, I do prefer having the native 16:9 4K display. And that is because as a content creator, it's just better to have native UHD resolution, and the color accuracy in this panel is a little bit better than the one in the 14T. So keep that in mind. Now, that doesn't mean that the panel being used in the 14T isn't good. It is. It's just not as good as the 13T. That's my experience, and that's also a fact based on their ability to reproduce color accuracy across different spectrums. So whether we're talking about Adobe, DCI, whatever it is, the edge goes to the 13T. It is just better when it comes to color accuracy than the 14T. Now, is it enough that I would say only go with the 13T? Absolutely not. Again, if you prefer the 3:2 aspect ratio, you want that extra height when using it for content consumption on the internet, not video playback, you will have the benefit of having that here, and you will still have the best 3:2 aspect ratio display on the market, because to my knowledge, this is the only 3:2 aspect ratio display on the market that is an AMOLED. Every other one is, of course, IPS. And there is no way anyone will ever convince me to take an IPS panel over an AMOLED display. That simple. Now, another thing you may have noticed, which I'll flex in a second here, is the audio quality difference. That's something where the 14T takes over. The audio performance on this machine is better than the 13T. Now, are they worlds apart? No. What it boils down to is that the 14T has a larger footprint, and as a result, there are several advantages to that, one of them being the audio quality. You may have noticed the speaker grill that runs along the top of the deck here. That just ends up delivering clear, undistorted sound. It doesn't get incredibly loud, whereas unfortunately the 13T, just as the generation before it, when they did the redesign, the Ice Lake 10th gen Intel version that I own, that is my daily driver, suffers from a little bit of vibration when playing back certain levels of audio. So frequencies, really. So as a result, that means sometimes when you're playing back audio on the 13T, you will hear vibration that is not pleasant Does it ruin the experience? No. Is it something that I'd like to see HP resolve? Absolutely. Unfortunately, it still exists here in the 11th Gen Tiger Lake refresh. So let's just play one and then the other. Let's go ahead with that. And audio is all the way up. I'll verify that here, and I know I already did it here. I'm going to stop that here, and let's catch up now with the 14T, which I will verify as well has the same audio levels. I did this already, but just so that you all at home can see, let's now take a look and a listen to the performance of the 14T. So, roughly the same spot, a little bit more here, but what you should have been able to hear is that this is clearly louder, and also the overall soundstage is better on the 14T. I stated this already, it's a fact of life, but in the same vein as I mentioned before, the display, in my opinion, on the 13T is superior. And it's not just my opinion, as I stated earlier, it's a matter of literal color accuracy and the spectrums it can cover. Again, 14T is no slouch, but it's part of the trade-off of a first-gen AMOLED panel with this resolution and aspect ratio. With that in mind, you can also pick up either of these with full HD displays, IPS panels. You'll get slightly better battery life, and that's something I'll be talking about throughout the course of this review. Let's jump out of this. I'm going to go ahead and close that out on each. Both of them are touchscreens, of course. They are 2-in-1s. They both have pens. Let's talk about overall processing power, and then I'll make my way through basically every element of each of these. So, as I mentioned at the top, 1165 G7 is powering both of these, and that's a really good thing. Intel's 11th Gen CPU does not disappoint. It outperforms Ice Lake significantly. Most impressive is the graphics. The integrated Iris Xe is just really far and away, it pretty much blows away what we got with Ice Lake. And Ice Lake was already a fairly big bump in terms of integrated GPU performance. But here, you're not going to have a problem on either of these machines playing modern titles in full HD at low settings. Medium, possibly, depending on what game we're talking about. You know, Fortnite, you'll get away with medium. If you're playing things that are more graphically intensive, that's where you're going to have to relegate yourself to low. But what that really equates to is getting somewhere between 80 and over 100 frames at full HD with integrated graphics. That's pretty amazing. That's something that I don't think we could have imagined several years ago, and now it's a reality with both of these Ultrabooks that weigh in at roughly 3 pounds. This one a little under, this one basically exactly 3 pounds. So you know what CPU and GPU performance is like. I mean, it's night and day versus Ice Lake, and you know, it does make me feel a little bit badly about my Ice Lake 13T, but you know, I do have a desktop for real gaming, so I didn't buy my 13T to game. But it's good to know that in a pinch, these really can take you to the next level, because with the 13T, I could not play games in full HD, even at low settings. So, pretty big jump when it comes to GPU, but on the CPU side, it's also big. We're talking about roughly 30% depending on what you're doing, and that's huge. So, if you're looking to video edit, in 4K, I might add, which is something that I do on Ultrabooks. Most people say, oh, don't, you know, if you want to do that, don't bother. No, I disagree. It's totally doable. Now, if that's the only purpose of the machine, then obviously Ultrabooks aren't the best route to go. But if you're going to be doing some light editing, some photo editing in Photoshop, these aren't going to have any issue. You want to run, you know, Autodesk suite applications on here, you're not going to have a problem. These machines are completely competent. Granted, they're both a quad core. We don't have 6 cores under the hood. That's what the H series Intel line is for. These are still really, really good. And you're not taking a huge hit on battery life. I've discussed battery life on both of these. They're roughly the same. You're going to be anywhere between 7 to possibly 9 hours, depending on what you're doing. And there's some cool features on the 14T that I'm going to show you that unfortunately don't exist in the 13T when it comes to HP's command center. So CPU on both of them, fantastic, pretty much a wash, 16 gigs of RAM on each, as I mentioned. The only thing that the 14T has in terms of specs to outclass the 13T is, and this is just because it's a custom config, is the 1 terabyte NVMe on here. And they both are essentially operating at the same speeds. So that really comes down to which NVMe you're going to select as your SSD when you custom configure these machines or purchase it already built from a source like Best Buy or even HP. They do have pre-builts that can ship out in a few days rather than waiting a month for a custom. The blue color you see here, though, you'll have to pick up in a custom configuration. It's only $10 more. I personally think these are the two best colors that HP puts out. I'm not a huge fan of the Nightfall Black. I do like the contrast on both of these with the accents that run around the side with the gem cut design. I just think these are the most flattering and also the least conducive to fingerprints. So if you're worried about how dirty a machine's going to look over the course of your usage, these are going to fare the best. So we've discussed the display quality that goes to the 13T, not just in terms of color accuracy, but resolution itself. Some will say that 4K is not needed on a 13.3-inch display. I wholeheartedly disagree with that concept because I use this, well, the 13T Ice Lake version at least, every single day, and I would never go back. Granted, battery life on Ice Lake, not as good here. Again, between 7 and 9 hours, depending on what you're doing. Ice Lake comes close, but doesn't have the performance, and these still have more battery life to boot. So that's a very big performance increase, in my opinion, with the Tiger Lake CPUs and, of course, the Iris Xe graphics. Now, moving away from the multimedia and processing capability, let's talk about human interface, the actual point of input for you. Keyboards. Good news here. Best in the business on both of them. You're working with virtually identical keyboards. Not really a lot different between these two, but there are some nuanced differences with the new 14T that are worth pointing out. So, first and foremost, the power button is actually on the keyboard deck. You can see that LED being lit up right now on the power button. Now, whether or not you're going to prefer having the power button on the keyboard deck or on the side of the body is really a matter of personal preference. Historically, of course, the Spectres did not have power buttons on the deck. That's really a matter, as I just said, of personal preference. For me, that would not make my decision on either of these. But what the 14T has that the 13T doesn't have, which I like, is a dedicated button for the HP Command Center. So you can go ahead and jump in there and change your performance profiles on the fly. You can see right now I have this set to Smart Sense, but easily changed over to Performance, which is what I have this set to right now, the 13T. Unfortunately, there is no dedicated button on the 13T. I'm not sure why, if they were going to introduce it here, they didn't say, hey, we're going to bless all of the Spectres with this, but it's not the only way they're different. They both have dedicated microphone mute buttons that do actually show you that everything has been muted, which I like. So right here, you've got that dedicated LED right there for your mute button for the microphone. Here we have a dedicated microphone as well as speaker mute button, so you know that everything is muted. I mean, you have that here as well. So the real key is the gain of that Command Center button. And another thing you should be aware of is the fingerprint scanner has been moved to the keyboard deck as well, rather than sitting on the wrist rest part of the deck. So just something to be aware of. Not any true real difference between these two. It's not going to change your experience. But again, in order to open the Command Center on this machine, you're going to have to pin it like I did and just have a dedicated, icon for it somewhere on your desktop for quick access, or you're going to have to jump into your start menu. Another thing that is worth pointing out is focus mode. So you can see it just dimmed the background of the display, which by the way, brightness is at 100%. And you'll see what focus mode is literally described as is that it keeps the selected window in focus while other windows dim to save battery life. And they also claim to keep you focused. Now, unfortunately, I don't see that on the 13T, didn't see it on the 15T either. So this seems to be something only baked in to the 14T. However, if I'm wrong, of course, I stand to be corrected. If you know something I don't, drop a comment and let everyone know, because knowledge is power. That's the whole premise of this. But I like that it's there. It is useful. Surprisingly, this is a cool feature that I haven't seen anybody point out that I think is very relevant and, again, not only useful, but practical in that it does actually save you battery life. So we're maintaining the same amount of brightness on the window we're looking at and de-emphasizing brightness on the rest. I think it's smart. Now if you're running something in full screen, it's not going to do anything, but if you have windows open, it makes sense. So not something you're going to see here, but still a cool feature. Should this make your decision? No. I think ultimately what makes your decision is, as I've stated, the display and the touchpad. So let's talk about that touchpad, because I've already talked about the keyboard and they're pretty much identical outside of what I mentioned in terms of the power button and the fingerprint scanner. But also want to mention, of course, the camera kill switch, before I forget that, is integrated into the keyboard deck, whereas on this machine, it's on the right side of the body. So if you do prefer it there, that's another thing you should be aware of. And when this does give you privacy of that HD webcam at the top center, you may have noticed it creates a little physical block on it. If I hit that, you'll see it disappears. With this machine, when you switch on the privacy, which again is on the right side, when I do the body tours, I'll show you that, it does not physically block the camera, it just cuts power to it. For some of you, the privacy, the added privacy that the 14T offers may be another compelling factor. For me, I believe that the power is cut here, but I get wanting a physical privacy screen, and that's what you're getting with the 14T. So, moving away from the keyboard, typing, by the way, if that wasn't a given already, if you haven't watched my coverage, is excellent on both. I prefer it over any machine on the market. Right amount of travel, right chiclet key size on these keyboards, and it's just a pleasure to type on. Really is my favorite on the market from any manufacturer. Touchpad. I said this was, besides the screen, and I'll throw in the speakers too, arguably the biggest difference between the two machines, because here on the 13T, you've got a pretty tight configuration, a rectangle. Here we've got more of a square, granted still rectangle-ish, but basically almost twice the size of what you're getting on the 13T. So if there's any reservation in your mind about the size of the touchpad, trackpad on the 13T, the 14T kills it. I mean, both of them are very good. I don't want you to think for a moment that one is better than the other in terms of performance, because it isn't. But if you prefer larger touchpads, the 14T is clearly the way to go. No comparison at all. In fact, this is a larger touchpad than you'll get on the 15-inch version of this 2-in-1, curiously. So, just had to make everyone aware of that because it is important. And I know that I do actually prefer the touchpad here. I really feel it's well balanced, it's the right size, but it's just something to be aware of. So, moving away from touchpad and keyboard, I mentioned the speakers, and I'll re-emphasize that because I really do wish we had the same, equal footing on sound capability when it comes to these two machines. Unfortunately, it's just not the case. And I guess ultimately that's the price of getting the form factor that the 13T provides. And I find it important because the 13T can fit in places the 14T can't. Now, granted, we're in the middle of a pandemic, so I'm not really doing any traveling. And that's cute, right? This is something HP needs to stop doing. But it's important to note that for me, again, this is personal preference, and that's what it should come down to for all of you out there. This can fit in camera bags that have slots designed for iPads. This is not going to fit there. And for me, that's a big difference because ultimately that boils down to me selecting something that's more backpack-esque, something larger, that even though this machine is literally just a little bit heavier than the 13T, it means having to take a completely different bag. So just be aware. I'm not saying that that should make you lean towards one or the other, but for me, it has. That in the combination with getting a true UHD 16:9 display. Of course, there are a lot of people out there that will prefer the 3:2 aspect ratio, and that's just a fact of life. Another thing I want to point out, thermals, because that's part of the form factor as well. Now, I have not experienced any hardcore throttling on either of these machines when put under load, what we're talking about, whether we're gaming, editing 4K, but it's important to note that overall, I do think the 14T fares a little bit better. It's a little bit quieter than the 13T. That's not to say that the 13T is a noisy mess. It's not, but I've seen more instances of the 13T's fans spinning up than I have of the 14T. Also, as I pointed out in other the update I did on this machine, the 14T, the actual spin up of the fans sounds different. Now, is that a problem? No, it's just interesting because I've noticed the 13 and 15T sound the same when they're trying to cool things off, whereas the 14T, I don't know if it's just because they're using different fans, it does have a different sound that it emanates from it. So something to be aware of, but not a problem. So thermals are a little bit better, both in benchmarking and actual video editing and gaming and photo editing. So just be aware of that. But that, again, shouldn't be what makes you decide on the 14T versus the 13T, because they're so close in performance that I would not let that sway you. That's why I'll continue to reiterate, it's all about the display, the audio quality, and the touchpad. That really, in my opinion, is what should end up influencing your decision at the end of the day, because those three things are the most stark contrast between these two laptops, Ultrabooks. So, moving away from thermals and overall performance, let's talk about pen input. Both of these come with HP's new Tilt 2.0 pen. It's great. You know, it is really a nice finish. You have two buttons on each. Of course, silver came with the natural silver, and the darker color came with the Poseidon blue. Both of them charge via Type-C connection in the exact same spot. You just slide up that portion and you have a Type-C port. Charging is fairly quick, and pen input is better than on the Ice Lake 10th gen version of at least the 13T and 15T. Of course, the 14T didn't exist. What else you should know is that HP no longer has an upgraded, more premium pen. So they've pretty much decided to focus on the standard pen, and I think that's smart. I purchased the Tilt pen for my 13T Ice Lake edition, and it is better than HP's pen that they were giving away for free, but it is not better than what I've experienced with the Tilt 2.0. Battery life is solid on this. I don't know exactly what the runtime is, but I haven't really needed to charge this more than a few times since these were shipped to me for review by HP. And an inking video is likely going to come from both of these and the 15T if you're interested in that, so stay tuned. It's all a matter of when my fiance gets to that. Now, these are both magnetic, but one thing I will tell you right now is that the 13T does not really support any good way to magnetically attach this, whereas the 14T, it really does lock on to the left side of the machine very well. I'll show you that right now. And for some of you, that may be an issue. For others, you may not care because both of these come with a sleeve that the pen slots into. So I personally love that this actually stays on there, and it's really tight. I mean, you can see I'm pulling, and I mean, no matter how much I move this, it's not moving. Unfortunately, that's just not a nicety of the 13T. There is nowhere that this really attaches well, except for on the back, on the hinge, and, well, you're not going to want to put it there, I assure you, because it'll pop off every time you open it up. It's just not a way to store it. That's really the end of the story. Pricing. The 13T is less expensive, and I find that interesting because the 13T was really expensive when it launched last year, the machine I bought, the Ice Lake version, with the AMOLED and basically the same specs that you're getting here, very similar. I believe Best Buy sold it for $17.99, and of course it always went on sale. My build was over $2,000 with a 2 terabyte NVMe. And if you do need the extra storage, bear in mind, you can upgrade the NVMe drives on your own. That's the only thing you'll be able to upgrade on your own. RAM is soldered, so make sure that if all you need is 8, you buy the 8. If you know you need the extra headroom of 16, get 16. I'm waiting for the day that they'll give us a 32 gig option, but that day is still not upon us. But keep all of that in mind because it's important, obviously, when making your investment in this new hardware. But the moral of the story is that through the pandemic, both of these machines became more of a value. And I don't know if that's just because HP decided to throw us all a bone or things are a little bit more difficult for them. Either way, I think both of them, if bought on sale, are steals. So I've seen the 13T in this configuration, it's around, I think, $1,400 or $1,500, which, considering last year, the same configuration with an Ice Lake processor was closer to $2,000. That's great. And then when we look at the 14T, which is sold, I believe, for $16.99 at Best Buy with a very similar configuration to this, that right now is on sale for, I think, $14.50. I've seen it on sale for even less. So HP has been aggressive on both of these. And hey, considering the processing power, the portability, even though we're in a pandemic where you don't really need to travel, but it's still nice to have something light that performs really well, solid battery life. it's a great thing that pricing went down on both of these. And that may only be because HP knows that everybody's in a little bit more of a bind here, economically speaking, with the fact that, well, we've been in a pandemic now really since, March was the official date it began of 2020, but ultimately that wasn't really the date, right? The first cases were before that here in the US. And so it's just something to be aware of, that maybe HP recognized that nobody's really making a killing here during the pandemic. Well, wrong choice of words, but doing better financially speaking. And as a result, maybe they knew they had to tighten things up on pricing a little bit. So the 13T is the more affordable model, but that's not to say the 14T doesn't have its days, because as I've stated, I've seen this running for even less, depending on the sale. So again, pricing really shouldn't sway you one way or the other unless you prefer the 13T, because it is going to be less every single time you configure it. So something to be aware of. Beyond that, we've discussed the display, we've discussed audio quality, we've discussed the keyboard, thermals, the touchpad, fingerprint, well, the overall keyboard in terms of changes they've made. Unfortunately, the webcam has not gotten any better on either of these. The good news is that it is HD, and it does support Windows Hello because it is an IR webcam. So that means you can unlock this with facial recognition. The bad news is the webcam still kind of sucks, but it's not an HP problem. This is a problem with the whole industry. Let me get that back into frame. Unfortunately, most of the industry has not made better use of their webcams. So I can't really blame HP when no one is really hitting that out of the park. But maybe next generation, sometime here in the new year, 2021, we're going to see better webcams on ultra portables like these, because it's about time. There's no reason that tablets should outperform devices like this, or our phones for that matter. They should be on par. Granted, HP did pull off, slotting in a IR camera into a nearly bezel-less machine on both of these. So they deserve credit where it's due. Hopefully we'll see a better camera sooner than later. Let's talk about I/O. Get this pen out of here. Of course, as you all know, these are both 2-in-1s. They both have the ability to fold over, and that's kind of the premise, right? You can put it in any posture you personally prefer, but at the end of the day, what I'm really going to point to here is that the actual hinge on both is very good. So, very little wobble on these, pretty tight. In my opinion, this is one of the better hinge systems out there on the market. And there are feet on the keyboard, little rubber nubs to essentially ensure that when you put this on a surface like I'm doing right now, it isn't going to get damaged. There's going to be some buffer between the keys and the surface it's contacting. Brightness on these two panels is roughly the same, roughly 400 nits, which I think is very good. I mean, in the market right now, it's very rare that you're going to see something much brighter. Of course, HP does have a 1000 nit option in their wheelhouse, but with the AMOLED, you're not getting that. And I would definitely take the AMOLED display on either of these configurations over the IPS. That's my personal preference. Again, if you're looking for more battery life, the full HD IPS panel with either of these is going to yield that. I can't tell you exactly how much more, but inherently it will be more between the resolution and IPS sipping less power than the AMOLED panels. So another thing I want to touch on is the I/O, as I just mentioned. So let's take a look at that. And I'm going to go ahead and actually close both of these. Finally see the top of it at almost 30 minutes in. And one thing I can tell you, which I should have said at the top of this video, is that you will not go wrong with either of these machines. They're well made, they're good looking, and their performance is pretty much best in class. The only other machine that I would compare these to right now is the Lenovo Yoga 9i 14-inch, which is also a phenomenal piece of hardware. Which you're going to pick is really going to be a matter of personal preference. I will be comparing both of these to that machine as well. Well, already have some of that in the works, but the 13T specifically. So 13T, very similar to last generation, pretty much the same, except Thunderbolt 4 rather than Thunderbolt 3. Only real difference for Thunderbolt 4 is support for 8K display out. So if you want to drive a single 8K monitor, which I don't, but maybe you do, you can do that. Otherwise, Thunderbolt 4 and 3 they have the same throughput on bandwidth, so just be aware of that. You can charge using either of these connections or inputs. Kill switch for the cameras right next to it, micro SD card slot on the right side, nothing on the front of the machine. On the left, you have a lone Type A USB 3 port and your headphone microphone combo jack, and that is it. I mean, the power button, as it has always been in the Spectre line, right there on the gem cut corner, and that's all she wrote, folks. Spectre branding on the hinge right there. That's the whole deal. Now we step over to the 14T, and as I mentioned, the power button's on the deck. So no power button here. Completely clean on the left side. They've done away with that. The Thunderbolt 4 ports in the exact same orientation you just saw. The headphone microphone combo jack is in between them, and the micro SD card slot right there. And as we come around the machine, not a whole lot to look at, very clean design. And then you have a Type A USB 3.0 port, which doesn't have the little dust cover, the shield, that you'll find on the 13T. So clearly some design differences on the back, Spectre branding right there. Ventilation on these, very similar. Let me go ahead and flip over the other machine so you can see them side by side. They're made of the exact same materials, so you're not going to have build quality problems. At least I didn't. Now, in the Ice Lake version of the 13T, I went through a lot of problems. If you take a look at my channel, if you followed my coverage last year, or if you're looking at it now, you'll see I actually had to go through 3 of the 13Ts until I finally got this guy right here, which is my daily driver right here. This is my personal machine, and you can see design is exactly the same, not a whole lot different. The kill switch is in the same spot, Thunderbolt 3 ports in the same location, power button in the same location, the lone Type A USB 3.0 port, headphone, microphone combo jack. It's all pretty much the same. But as I stated, of course, I went through a lot of problems getting a 13T that didn't have popping on the keyboard deck. It was just a nightmare. Again, go and take a look at those videos if you're curious. Here, no problems at all. So I don't know if I just got lucky or HP tightened things up because they got enough feedback from customers who were concerned with the actual build quality of the Spectre lineup, and so they addressed it. But when it comes to ventilation, as I mentioned earlier, I do feel that the 13T fares a little bit worse, and that's just because it has a smaller footprint. And to reiterate that, you can see that smaller footprint right there. I mean, there is a significant difference between these two. I'm going to flip it over so you can see it from that angle as well, from top down. But in my opinion, if I had to pick one, I would go still with the 13T, believe it or not. And that's because for me personally, as compelling as the 14T is, and nuanced improvements like the HP Command Center having a dedicated button, like the camera having a privacy shield, having a larger trackpad, touchpad, those are all great things. Better audio performance, which you think would be a shoo-in for me. I still prefer the basically ultimate color accuracy that you're getting out of the 13T. This comes really close. If I wasn't a YouTuber, if I wasn't doing any color proofing, I'd probably be all over the 14T. But I also am not a huge fan, as you noticed when playing back video on the 3:2 aspect ratio, of the letterboxing. I just, it's one of those things where I want to be able to utilize UHD natively, and we just don't get it. So as you can see right there, the 16:9, a little bit wider. Of course, it's not as tall. And this is what I was talking about in terms of being able to fit the 13T in places that the 14T simply cannot. So something to be aware of. And this is all going to come down to personal preference. Which one is right for you is going to boil down to, in my opinion, really, as I've said throughout the whole video, the display, the speaker performance, and the touchpad. Those are really the defining differences, in my opinion. Now, if you're looking at machines with different specs, those will be the defining principal differences. But here, our specs are identical. So, except for the NVMe drive. Wi-Fi 6 is on board both, Bluetooth 5.0. They both work very well. And as I've said, battery life being equal, thermals nearly being equal, all benchmarking pointing to nearly identical results. Just a little more throttling here, a little bit more. That still wouldn't make me not want to use this. Another important point, Tiger Lake versus Ice Lake, you can run performance mode without being connected to the wall. On the Ice Lake machine that I have right there, you have to be plugged in to use performance mode. That would ultimately be my biggest reason for wanting to get either of these machines right now, because that means that whenever I do video editing on the 13T Ice Lake machine back there, I got to be plugged in. It's just a fact of life. With these, no such thing. And then you have the added benefit of that focus mode on the 14T, which oddly doesn't exist on the 13T. But overall, that pretty much wraps things up. Again, in my opinion, I would still stick with the 13T. You know, the fact that it has inferior speakers, the fact that it is missing some, again, improvements that the 14T has gotten, I still think the form factor of the 13T and the panel quality of that AMOLED is more mature and just unmatched in the marketplace. Of course, the 14T is unmatched too. You will not find another machine with a 13.5-inch 3:2 aspect ratio AMOLED. You can find other machines with a 13.5-inch 3:2, 3000 by 2000 resolution display, but none of them are AMOLED like this, which makes the 14T one of, if not the most unique machine of this year. But for my personal use, I mean, I'd be happy with this, don't get me wrong. I mean, if HP said, hey, Ed, you can keep it, enjoy, I'm not going to blink. This thing is a beast, and arguably their most impressive new addition to their lineup of laptops in years, in my opinion. But at the end of the day, I still prefer having the more color accurate, true UHD panel with 16:9 aspect ratio. The beauty here is you don't have to, you're not being forced to take one or the other. You can pick which is right for you. Previously, you didn't have this option, so I couldn't even give you a comparison like this. All I could do is compare the 13 and the 15. So I think this is, the pandemic isn't a great time for a lot of things, but it is a great time for picking a new Ultrabook. And since the majority of the work that any of you out there are likely doing can be done on either of these, it's good to have options. What can I tell you? So again, I will reiterate, you cannot go wrong with either of these. Hopefully I've explained everything that you need to know top to bottom in terms of, battery life, display quality, keyboard quality, trackpad quality, the thermal capability in terms of when you're going to run into throttling. You can't go wrong with either. I've said it over and over again because, quite frankly, I even feel that way, even though I've said I prefer the 13T because of its form factor and native UHD AMOLED that is slightly better in, 99% Adobe RGB versus I think it's 95 over here. It's not a world of difference. I've said that, but I think the thing that will be a world of difference to many of you is the aspect ratio difference. And for me, I still have to have 16:9. I really like having the 3:2, but I do not like trying to, color proof on it and having letterbox. It's not the end of the world, but the fact of the matter is this does exist and it is smaller and audio quality isn't as good, but I can throw on headphones. I don't really rely on this to listen to music, of course, and even when proofing video content, the fact of the matter is that this is not an amazing experience either. It's just better than the 13T. So, and that's what a lot of the story is here, is that a lot of the features are just better than the 13T, and that's it. It's not that it's, a world of difference. That's it. So I've noticed no difference in the webcams at all. So that's something else you want to be aware of. And then the other question becomes, which is another review for another day, are you better served with something like this, with a Galaxy Tab S7 Plus? And you might be. It really depends on what you're looking for. If you need Windows, these are clearly the answer. But if you don't need Windows, maybe you save some money and you get a tablet that's lighter, a little bit smaller, very similar battery life, I might add, a little bit better battery life with the tablet, but not, again, a world of difference. And that's why I pointed out. And then there's, of course, the Yoga 9914, but that's a different video for a different day. Overall, love both of these. Wish that I had Tiger Lake rather than Ice Lake, but that's the nature of electronics, folks. You buy something now, you use it, you enjoy it, and then you worry about what comes out later. The only thing you don't want to do is buy something right before it's about to be refreshed. Now, if you want to save some money, Ice Lake is the way to do it. You can get these at incredible prices, but you've got to keep in mind the differences. Battery life, processing performance, about 30% less than what you'll get out of either of these, and that's significant. One thing I didn't mention that I will now, charge times. A little bit over an hour on both of these using HP's included 65-watt charger. Of course, Type-C is how you're charging it. So that's another nice thing. Quick charge time, long battery life, really small profile, Again, both roughly 3 pounds. These are go anywhere workhorses. And that's pretty much it, folks. Hope you enjoyed the video. We're almost at 40 minutes. I didn't intend to go this long, but if you follow my channel, you already know when I do deep dives and comparisons on machines, especially that I really like, I go the distance. And of course, nothing was scripted here, and some of you may hate that, some of you may like that and appreciate it. Either way, I hope you enjoyed the video. And again, I would pick the 13T, but I would not for a moment not enjoy having the 14T. I can say that without any hesitation. Both phenomenal. And pen input, again, stay tuned for an inking demo on both. Any questions or comments, please feel free to post them. Hit that like button. And as usual, please feel free to subscribe. And more importantly, please stay safe. Later.